Thank you, John, and thank you to the Greater Lafayette Area Safety Council. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And like I said before, my name is Eric George. I'm the founder of Arcem Solutions. We're a fully managed IT services business here in Lafayette, Indiana, so we're local. And the opportunity for us today is to educate everybody on the parallels between when I think of safety, Greater Lafayette Area Safety Council, I think of hard hats and machinery and hazards like that. But IT is just as important in our world as the physical safety. So when we look at cybersecurity issues, and Shelby's going to go through this, but there are a lot of trends upward. People trying to hack into your email, get your password, get into your bank account information. And when you have a compromise like that and they can't run payroll, employees are going to get a little agitated. So it's a very important thing to be able to be aware of some of the industry standards for IT safety and security and know what things that are out there that you may not have in place right now that you can get in place, just by knowing about it and talking to your IT company if you have an internal or whoever you partner with for your IT. So Shelby has been a member of GLASC for a year, and she's had a lot of great things to say about it. And I talked to John earlier. He said it's a growing community. So congratulations to everybody. It looks like a great group of people. And again, she will be able to kind of parallel some of the GLASC initiatives with IT and kind of relate those things to you. So without further ado, Shelby is our business development manager, and she will be taking over to kind of go through what IT services we recommend to have in place. Thank you. So I wanted to test this, but
That's fine.
it's not. It was working.
Just kidding.
Turn it off. Turn it back on. No problem. We'll get to it.
Thank you. So see, restarting doesn't always work. I have to call out Theron Daniels because he said more jokes in this presentation. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of those, but I do have my great Ortho Indy thermos. So we're going to stay hydrated today. Thank you guys for being with us. Every organization at some point reaches a decision where they have to stop worrying about technology, meaning computers, and they have to start focusing on the fact that it means operational confidence. That confidence is knowing that employees can do their jobs, that leaders can make decisions, knowing that their systems are secure, and that when something unexpected happens, someone already has a plan. That's actually where Arcem was built to live. In 2012, Eric George set out to solve an operational confidence deficit in the managed IT services space. He started that company in West Lafayette in his home with a single client that's still with us to this day, but we've also transitioned in that time period to DoD contractors, manufacturing, and healthcare facilities. Arcem has never measured success by the number of tickets closed. Rather, we measure our success by the fact that technology has been operating quietly in the background, and therefore people are enabled to do their best work without interruption. We focus on preventing problems before they become a crisis. That philosophy shapes everything that we do. We believe trust isn't built during an outage, it's built in the hundreds of decisions made beforehand. We design environments that are resilient enough to withstand pressure rather than focusing on what to do when something breaks. Our clients don't hire us because they need another IT vendor. They hire us because they need someone they can trust to understand their environments and to build their business development in a way that is protective and improving, and that they can continue to operate with that same level of confidence. Our commitment to proactive service, dependable execution, and genuine partnership has shaped Arcem since the beginning. We believe that the best IT is rarely noticed because it simply works. Behind that reliability is a team that shows up every day with the same purpose: to earn trust when it's needed, protect what matters most, and become the partner our clients never have to worry about. And I share that context with you because that lens is what's going to shape the rest of our discussion today. Many business owners feel uneasy about technology because they don't work in it every day. Our role is to close that gap, to answer questions as plainly and as often as needed, and to remind clients that their systems and data belong to them. So at first glance, Workplace safety and cybersecurity seem like different conversations, but they are not. The same principles that prevent injuries, reduce incidents, and improve accountability on the job site are the same principles that protect organizations through cyber attacks, fraud attempts, downtime, and operational disruption. The strongest organizations don't rely on luck when the pressure arrives. They build systems, processes, and cultures designed to perform when the stakes are highest. And so in order to do that, they have to develop good safety programs. And so every safety program is going to ask 5 questions. What could go wrong? How do we prevent the likelihood of this happening? If it happens anyway, how do we limit the damage? How are we going to recover? How do we keep it from happening again? What I hope you learned today is that these are not simply safety questions. They're actually organizational questions. And so we're going to evaluate those questions by exploring the similarities between traditional workplace safety and technology operations, including reducing single points of failure, creating reliable processes people can follow under pressure, building resilience before problems arise, and lessons from physical safety that apply directly to cybersecurity and IT operations. As we go through those examples, we're going to see practical ways that organizations can strengthen their ability to recover, adapt, and respond. So, why are incidents likely to occur under pressure? Well, frankly, human error is the number one reason that we're going to see today is a reason for that. Pressure causes employees to skip steps. They start trusting their own assumptions rather than verifying information. They stop communicating. Sometimes that means they normalize shortcuts that they would not otherwise normalize. And very often they prioritize speed over process. And so we can ask the question, why would someone choose to not wear their PPE? But the reality is they're very often in a hurry. They don't see the need for it in that moment. Maybe they're carrying equipment, right? I would suggest that whether they're going to be there for a second or not, they're actually not considering their individual impact to the larger organization by making in the moment choices. When I managed on-site employees at a local manufacturing facility a few years back, there was an incident that came up that has really stuck with me because of what it taught me about operational discipline. There was an employee that received a pretty nasty hand injury that needed outsourced medical care. And when the plant manager sat down with the employee to find out what had happened, the employee was asked if he had safety gloves. And his answer, well, yes, of course, they're right here in my back pocket. The natural next question was, were you wearing them? To which the answer was an obvious, well, no. That cost the plant over 4 hours of downtime. And beyond that, it caused a pretty serious disruption to every department that had nothing to do with that injury as well. The employee was trained on what to do. The plant trained every day on what they were supposed to be wearing. There were regular safety checks at the sites. But in that moment, safety was living on paper, not as a habit with that employee. The employee wasn't trying to create consequences by not wearing their gloves, right? They were just trying to get their job done. They were trusting that someone else was managing part of the process that they were working. They didn't see how their small decision to not wear gloves would ripple through the entire organization. And so when the IT space, we might say, well, why would someone choose to not use multi-factor authentication? And the answers are very much the same. The one I hear the most is, it slows me down. I'm just trying to get through my morning, right? I don't want to stop and go through the verification process. They don't think they're going to be targeted, right? But what this means is they don't see the larger impact of their decision and how it's going to affect their organization. So an IT example of this is when a trusted vendor that we're aware of had their email compromised, okay? And through that compromise, the attackers were able to gain access to the entire address book of this email account. They were able to, without notice, monitor conversations and see what a traditional tone was in dealing with their customers. They were able to understand what the payment schedules were, and they used that information to send out a phishing email to one of the vendor's customers. The customer thought it seemed legitimate. It referenced ongoing business, and they went ahead and wired a wire transfer totaling several $100,000 to this vendor. The only reason the fraud was noticed was because the actual vendor called and said, we haven't received any payment from you. So While that email resembled other communications, there were some red flags that were available to be noticed and acted upon that were actually ignored. And so the email signature and the company logo looked very similar, but they were not identical. That request involved changing banking information and making a high-value wire transfer. In of itself, it was actually an unusual request. That attacker leveraged urgency and familiarity to try to reduce the likelihood of additional verification. And because the employee believed it to be legitimate and they were hurrying to get this done, they went ahead and wired it without any other controls in place. And so we need to understand that in order to reduce single points of failure, we have to implement layered protection. Layered protection is about preparing for changing conditions. New threats emerge all the time. There's not a day that goes by, whether you're on social media or not, that you hear about a new AI scam that someone has succumbed to, right? Maybe employees leave, or you have vendors that change. Sometimes your organization acquires a new business, and I might add new housekeeping habits, right? That may or may not be in alignment with high security posture. Something that may have worked fine before suddenly becomes the actual point of failure when it's a single point checkpoint. Just as safety equipment has an inspection schedule, because everything deteriorates with time, hardware and software becomes outdated or unsupported, documentation becomes outdated, processes drift. The question can't be, will this fail? Rather, we need to ask, what are we doing to know before it actually does? The bottom line is humans make mistakes. People don't usually self-identify as reckless, but they do ignore procedures out of in-the-moment rationale, right? Oh my word, production is behind. Leadership is asking, my customers are waiting, the phone is ringing. We get tired, we get distracted, we get complacent. Human tendency is allow the ends to justify the means. Layered protection helps circumvent that process. We understand very clearly that a hard hat does not prevent falls on its own. We understand that fall protection doesn't prevent electrocution. We understand that lockout tagout doesn't prevent hearing loss. And in the same way, MFA doesn't stop ransomware. Backups don't stop phishing attempts. Email filtering doesn't stop insider mistakes. And endpoint protection doesn't stop fraud. And so this shows how a layered approach creates a more thorough protection. Hopefully your organization implements and trains on these three levels of controls, which are technology controls, process controls, and human controls. Some of the easy technology controls that we can talk about today are multi-factor authentication, which is MFA. You should have email filtering. There should be endpoint detection and response, and we're going to talk more about that later. Geofencing should be implemented. Under process controls, for wire verifications, you should have dual controls in place. There should be vendor validation processes in place. And the human controls, which is just as important as all these others, is the training. Do you have an active training program in regards to cybersecurity and IT hygiene for your employees? Are phishing simulations sent out every month so that your employees are kept up to date and top of mind with these attempts? Do you ask before you click? So why does this matter? Well, it matters because in 2023, $12.5 billion was reported in losses for cybercrime and IT fraud. 12.9 billion. That didn't slow down. It's actually increased. In 2025, the final report was $20.9 billion in reported losses. We might say, well, how and why were they compromised? Well, fortunately, we do have some data on that. On the rise is actually AI-assisted phishing leading to business email compromises and ransomware. We might say, wow, okay, something is staying consistent, except that point of consistency is the human error aspect. That leads to falling prey to phishing emails and credential theft. And the only thing that has improved slightly are password-only attacks. Well, that's a single layered approach, right? So in order to prevent multi-layered attacks, we have to implement multi-layer protections. So if you don't understand what phishing is, we're going to take a moment to kind of explain and walk through this. Phishing is a social engineering attack that impersonates trusted entities in order to steal your credentials, deploy malware, redirect payments, or gain access to systems. Do you remember the 20.9 billion from a second ago? Over 70% of email compromises start with an email. 70%. So that's something we can actually risk manage out of our businesses. Phishing emails should be recognizable. You need to look for urgent language. You need to look for misspelled domains, unexpected attachments, and login requests. There might be pressure to act quickly, right? And in this example here, we can see that the sender doesn't make sense. We need to recognize and avoid deceptive web links. Something that happened earlier this year was there were several pretty well-known nonprofits in the area that were compromised back in January, February. And it happened because it started with one person's email that got compromised. And they had access to over 3,000 contacts in that person's email. They then sent out phishing campaigns with SharePoint looking sites to click on and access. And all of those emails were tailored to the people that they were going to and reflected the type of business that they had already been discussing. And people thought, well, I wasn't expecting a SharePoint attachment, but maybe I missed something in that conversation. They clicked it and then they became compromised as well. It ripples out very quickly. One of the greatest strengths of a mature safety culture is that it learns from events where nobody actually got hurt. And so we call those near misses. So an example on the IT side would be somebody who almost clicks a phishing email when a wire transfer request comes in, but something feels a little off. An employee might report a suspicious login. Backups failed but quickly were restarted, or a terminated employee account is still discovered active. Well, what are phishing attempts trying to do? They're actually there to test you. They're there to test if urgency is going to override procedure. They're there to test if you are going to replace trust with verification. They're going to see if pressure time will shorten your decision-making process. Will somebody bypass policy because it looks legitimate? A phishing email is like someone walking through your facility with the wrong badge. They haven't stolen anything yet. They haven't harmed anyone yet. They're simply testing to see if you even notice. Most ransomware attacks begin with phishing. And so it starts with a phishing email. Assuming you click on those in the email or you interact with it in some way, your credentials become compromised. Then your systems get infected. And then there are ransom demands. And every step of this process can be circumvented by a multi-layered approach, right? The phishing email to the point where your credentials get compromised can be set in place by having multi-factor authentication in place and training your employees on what to look for so that they don't click. If you're worried about your systems getting infected, you should have endpoint detection and response in place where you're able to isolate the threats down to even the file that's on your computer so that it doesn't spread. If you're in the HIPAA space, this is a big one, especially in the vendor side. In the 2026 HIPAA guidelines, we're going to be seeing a higher increase of responsibility placed on your vendor partnerships and your vendor verification. And that's pretty serious because not every company's IT hygiene is the same. Not everybody's posture is the same. But we're going to be held accountable for that ripple effect. And so if you do end up getting ransomware, you're looking at operational downtime, you're looking at data loss and financial extortion and insurance claims. If you're in the HIPAA space as well, you're going to be looking at dealing with the state attorney general's office and the fines that are included there. For some companies, that'll put them out of business because the fines are so high. The loss of reputation is also important. And that's not as important to every organization and their culture, but I know at Arcem, that's everything we do is centered around our reputation. And so we don't ever want that damaged. Phishing might open the door, but ransomware is what takes everything. So what do we do about this, right? And the reality is small failures always happen before major failures. And so we have to learn what the red flags are. And that could look like a CEO suddenly requesting gift cards and telling you to keep that confidential, right? We laugh about it, Theron, because it's still happening, right? And that's why we bring it up. And sometimes the vendors will change information and payroll requests will come through from an employee to change their account before payday. That shouldn't be coming through email, first of all. You should have a portal of some kind in place. There might be a slightly different email domain that's mentioned, or there's an unusual login time, or there's multiple failed MFA attempts, or maybe someone's requesting access they wouldn't normally need. We would never accept in our organizations someone saying, oh, we've never had an accident as a reason for not putting proper procedures and policies in place. But in the same breath, we see organizations all the time that say, well, we've never had ransomware. And then they completely ignore good hygiene in that regard. We understand that the absence of failure does not become evidence that preparation and protection aren't necessary. A checkpoint I would like us to ask is, what are we doing to build in regular testing for the systems that we already do have in place? Who would notice if you had an email account that was compromised, like an executive? How would you know in your organization that that occurred? Would anyone question if there were payment requests that were rerouted or personal information that was requested? Would attackers be able to go unmonitored and unnoticed? And again, that's where this endpoint detection and response comes into play. We have to build reliable processes for when pressure strikes. During a chemical spill, ideally, no one should be asking, wait, do you have the emergency binder? Theoretically, that should never be happening. I've worked in organizations where that was actually the case. Someone had all the knowledge for the past 34 years, including contacts, and they didn't share that with anyone else. But that shouldn't be what's happening. The same thing holds true for ransomware. Someone should know who's going to call the bank, who's isolating systems, again, endpoint detection and response. What is your team doing? Who's going to contact legal? Who's going to communicate with your employees? Who's going to preserve your customer relationships? The reality is many organizations end up figuring that out during the incident. Everyone in this room immediately recognizes that that is the wrong time to build a plan. We have to keep in mind that pressure exposes what preparation forgot. So what does a plan even look like? Well, we have before, during, and after we have to take into consideration. Before the incident, we have to know who has the decision-making authority. That shouldn't be a scramble to figure out who's going to make a decision in the middle of a tense situation. Again, maintaining an up-to-date emergency contact list. When I dispatched for liquid hazardous, the primary employee at that facility had been there for 35 years. And she was the only person who had emergency contacts, who to contact even at corporate, our vendor contacts, the hazmat book. There was not good process for making sure every person in the organization was prepared in the event of an incident. There needs to be defined roles and responsibilities for IT, leadership, HR, and communications. The cyber liability insurance carrier contact information should be readily available. And someone needs to be verifying that backup procedures are regularly taken in. During an incident, you should disconnect your systems immediately. Again, endpoint detection and response. What are you doing to make sure that the isolation occurs? An instinct might be to panic. Okay, don't, because you have a process, right? You've trained on this. Your team understands the processes and procedures. You should not immediately wipe infected devices. You have to preserve that evidence. You need to activate your response team, notify your IT provider or internal IT department, and your cyber liability insurance carrier. And you need to communicate internally using trusted methods. If your systems are down, are you going to be able to access phones, Teams, email? Probably not. So what policies and procedures do you have in place to ensure that your team is able to engage properly? After the incident is just as important as what you're doing during. We have to verify that we understand why this happened. So that root cause analysis is really important, and we have to document those lessons learned. We can't stop there. We have to do something about it. That's going to involve training our employees, right, on what happened, what went wrong, and what we're going to do to prevent it again in the future. We have to update those procedures that we're training them on based on our findings. And we need to review security controls that failed. The quality of your response is determined long before the incident actually occurs. So what does business continuity look like? Well, every safety procedure is really a decision made in advance. A harness is a decision made before the climb. Lockout tagout is a decision made before maintenance can occur. PPE is a decision made before exposure. Emergency response plans are decisions made before the emergency. And in the same way, cybersecurity and IT hygiene are absolutely no different. We understand that MFA, multi-factor authentication, is a decision made before credentials get stolen. Backups are decisions made before ransomware or hardware crashes. Honoring hardware life cycles is a decision made before predictable failures become costly emergencies. Data governance is a decision made before someone opens the wrong version. And incident response plans are decisions made before systems fail. If you're building lost power today, would you be able to conduct business tomorrow? Because business continuity isn't just about restoring technology, it's about protecting your business. You need to be able to protect revenue. Can payroll still run? Can invoices still be processed? You have to preserve your customer trust and your employee productivity. Can your employees still work remotely? Can your customers still call in and get their questions answered? You need to make sure that you are protecting your regulatory compliance. And that's what a lot of these procedures support, especially in a lot of the industries in this room, is that regulatory compliance aspect. And just as importantly, your company's reputation. The question we should be asking is, are we building for today's workload or are we building for tomorrow's disruption? So in order to prepare for tomorrow's disruption, we have to practice good housekeeping habits. Proper housekeeping is one of the best things we can do to reduce vulnerabilities. And so that's going to look like having good access controls over your documents and your system access. And I'm going to use SharePoint as an example because a lot of organizations are familiar with it and utilize that. But SharePoint is going to allow your organization to intentionally control who can view, edit documents, and who can approve those changes. It also can control how you share that information internally and externally. And it controls who can delete files. Do you want an employee who's on their way out to be able to delete their work history in your SharePoint for the last several years? Of course not. We want to have proper procedures in place to make sure that they don't have control over things that they're not allowed to have control over. Without those access controls, employees might accidentally edit or overwrite critical documents. Sensitive information might be shared with the wrong people. Former employees might retain access longer than they should. And confidence is really important here because your organization needs to have the confidence that the version that they're viewing is the correct one. If you provide intentional access controls, you're going to make sure that the right people have the right level of access for their job function. Your critical documents are going to remain protected. Your team knows where the authoritative copy lives. Permissions should reflect job responsibilities, not convenience. And that's something we run into a lot, is that employees might not care for certain things like multi-factor authentication or restrictions because they feel it impedes their ability to do their job. But it really just comes down to convenience and time. The goal isn't to lock everything down, it's to make safe corrective action the easiest action. When it comes to system access, enforcing single sign-on. So like issuing one controlled badge instead of dozens of individual keys, access is easier to manage, revoke, and easier to audit. When was the last time you cleaned your digital key ring? Organizations commonly review their physical keys, their access codes, their building access, and credentials more carefully than the digital identities in their systems. Every user account, password, and vendor login, and forgotten shared account, is another key that can unlock part of your organization. Over time, those keys multiply, they accumulate. Employees change roles and keep their previous access. Vendors come and go and keep their previous access. Projects end, systems evolve, but access is really rarely cleaned up with the same discipline that we would use for physical security. Just as we would never accept one key unlocking an entire facility, one password should not give you access to the VPN, your payroll systems, banking information, your Microsoft tenant, internal data, and internal databases. Do you actually know where those keys are? Who's owning those accounts? What are they used for? Where are they used? And some examples might be the maintenance portal, your internet service provider account, your domain registrar, your firewall login, camera access. The same thing goes for vendors. Vendors should only have managed temporary access to your systems. Managed temporary access. That means someone has to be regularly maintaining their access. Building a secure organization isn't just about choosing strong passwords. It's about managing who has access, why they have it, how long they're going to have it, and regularly removing the access that they no longer need. Strong organizations don't just control who gets the keys, they build reliable processes for retrieving them, issuing them, and tracking them. Digital security works the same way. So when it comes to documentation, I want you to imagine walking into a manufacturing facility where there were no written lockout procedures. It happens, I'm sure. Shouldn't happen, right? Now imagine an organization with no documented administrator password, no network diagram, no vendor contacts, no recovery procedures, and no ownership records. We all agree that's pure chaos. Documentation supports an organization in performing consistently when people, circumstances, or pressure changes. And so when it comes to standard operating procedures, would someone new know how to add or disable an employee? Would they know how to restore a deleted file? What about recover from ransomware? Replace a field firewall? Do they manage the hardware lifecycle plan? Do they know how to do that? If they don't know how to do any of those things, your organization's process is living in someone else's head. And the same thing holds true for network documentation. If your network administrator resigned tomorrow, could someone rebuild your environment or handle an emergency quickly? And so some examples of that might look like network diagrams and IP address schemes, VLANs, internet circuits, wireless layouts, firewall rules, and VPN configuration. When it comes to security documentation, are any of the following documented and enforced? Multi-factor authentication, password standards, conditional access and security groups. We bring up vendors a lot in this presentation because sometimes they just slip through the cracks. And again, as we're looking at a strong security posture evolving because of the types of attacks and scams that are out there, we have to understand that a lot of organizations are being held accountable for their vendor management. And so we know that most of us have dozens of vendors that we work with, but do we know who's owning those relationships or managing the contract renewal dates? Do we have support phone numbers logged somewhere? Are there emergency escalation contacts? What about account numbers and licensing information? Well, yeah, so-and-so probably knows that. Okay, but where is that information located? We need to make sure it's documented well. When it comes to disaster recovery, we need to make sure that our recovery priorities and recovery times are documented thoroughly and that backup locations are identified and managed. When it comes to users, your onboarding and offboarding checklists are equally as important. Especially as organizations get larger, sometimes they don't manage the offboarding process as cleanly as they did when they were smaller. Someone should be holding people who are responsible for that accountable. There should be a verification process to make sure that the offboarding was completed. When it comes to business continuity and disaster recovery plans, asset documentation is really important. You can't protect assets you don't know exist. If your building has a fire, or you get ransomware, or there's a flood, or a power surge, does your organization have a management plan for documenting the purchase date, warranty, replacement cycle, operating system, and software licensing associated with all your hardware? Do you know where all your servers are? Does someone know how many firewalls and access points there are? These things are really important to make sure that we document them thoroughly. So when it comes to governance, there's a lot of data on this screen, but each one of these has its own part to play in how we manage our systems. IT and data governance define how decisions are made, who is responsible, and how technology and information are managed to reduce risk and support the business. When it comes to acceptable use policies, AI is a big concern. You should have an internal HR policy documenting what is allowed to be used, making sure that a company email address is used for those OpenAI accounts and not a personal Gmail account. You should make sure that help all users learn is toggled off. What about personal devices? Do you have restrictions in place requiring their VPN usage and blocking their downloaded company data? Just like with passwords, as we discussed earlier, you need to make sure you're implementing a reuse policy. When it comes to least privilege, employees should only receive the access they need to perform their job. That reduces the risk in case their account is compromised or a mistake is made, because access should be earned by responsibility, not accumulated over time. We need to regularly verify that users still have the access that they need to have while removing outdated permissions before they become security gaps. Yesterday's access isn't always today's requirement. It's convenient, but it's not a requirement. When somebody changes positions, their access to your systems should change with them. They should only retain what they need, and we should remove what they do not need anymore. A new role should come with new responsibilities, not all the old permissions too. When it comes to temporary vendor access, who's going to make sure that those changes are approved? Who's documenting those changes? Who's validating those changes? So I want to ask you, who is owning cybersecurity in your organization? And if it's an internal ID department or an external provider, that's good that you know that. But I want to ask you, who's holding them accountable? Because again, as organizations grow, sometimes the verification process to make sure that we are following our processes is not always put into place. There should be annual business reviews, and there should be consistent conversations with leadership to make sure that processes are being followed. And so any organization's IT department or IT provider should be really strong across the following 5 pillars of organizational resilience. They need to be following good protection habits. That's going to include MFA, email security, endpoint protection and response, DNS filtering, and geofencing. They need to have good preparation procedures in place. Is documentation happening? Is there asset inventory? Is there a disaster recovery and incident response plan? They need to make sure that they are capable of verifying vendors and that there are dual controls in place for wire transfers. Do they have a good training program in place? Are phishing simulations and security awareness a part of your company's and your organization's regular habits? New employee onboarding shouldn't look like, here's an email printout of your username and password. There should be something more involved to it so they understand what your organization's hygiene and security posture is. The reality is, technology does not create resilient organizations. People do. Processes create resilient organizations. Preparation does. The organizations that recover the fastest are rarely the ones with the biggest IT budgets. They're the ones that prepared before pressure arrived. If you guys have any further questions today, we can take them at this time, or you can email Eric or myself if you guys want to troubleshoot anything within your organizations. Thank you for your time. I'm already sitting down, so.